There was a quiet, soft breeze as they sat looking at the small campfire ringed with stones. Nothing special. Just rocks they'd picked up to make a fire break instead of trying to dig into the rocky ground. Flames danced on the broken branches. Tiny embers would pop and rise like little falling stars in reverse. No one was speaking, not really wanting to break the silence or the respite from the day's events. A well-built brunette with hazel eyes somewhere in her early 30s, her hair no longer in her usual ponytail, hung down past her shoulders on both sides, hiding her face as she absently twisted a stick in the coals. A man with gray in his hair and beard, both slightly curly, obviously older though looking at him. It could have been 10 or 30 years her senior. His dark eyes seemed to carry the weight of centuries, contrasting with his physical appearance, making him a mystery. It was as if he was looking through the fire into God only knows where. There were also others there. They were partly just in shock, trying to comprehend what was undoubtedly the end of life as they'd known it. A young woman, not much more than a girl, huddled wrapped in a blanket. Her name was Chloe, and her tears had long since dried. Now there was just a hollow numbness. She kept looking at the hand she held out in front of her, clenching and unclenching her fingers as if to confirm that it was still her own. Beside her, a former doctor named Marcus sat, his pristine medical scrubs now stained with dirt and blood. He kept adjusting his glasses, a nervous tic that had become constant since the collapse of everything he had ever believed in. He was a man of science, of order, and the chaos of the last few days had dismantled his worldview more completely than any plague. Dave was a large man with serious physical skills that surpassed most individuals, but what made him truly dangerous was his mind. He'd been through so much hell as a child, he'd gained an unstoppable mentality, without the normal hesitation and resistance to act. He'd literally been destined for the lethal skills training he'd eventually learned in the military. He wasn't a normal person by any means when his mindset switched to war. However, so long as he was focused on not being in that mindset, he would flip-flop from an almost innocent, childlike demeanor to hiding from his demons in whatever den and intoxicant would do the job at the time. Regardless, though, he was always loud and crass. Primarily, it seemed to be a habit formed in his youth, probably as a defense against the world he'd been born into. However, now he sat, staring intently into the fire, quiet, focused, and at the ready, while simultaneously lost in thoughts of the day. Everything they'd ever known was just gone. There was no pause or replay, no bad dreams to awaken from. It was all just gone. This place had been the last best vestige of peace and the freedom of equality and compassion by its foundational design. Now it had become a war zone on a biblical scale. The residents, in their sheltered and privileged ignorance, had finally been manipulated enough to be twisted into a weakened and divided place. A weak and yet malevolent leader had dealt the final pieces of the trap, allowing the enemies to infiltrate and get their footholds. The trigger came earlier than this traitorous group had expected, though, so they'd been forced to rewrite their playbook to some degree, but the die had been cast, and the dominoes were falling regardless. They hadn't planned for as much resistance as there still remained. Regardless, in the big picture, they'd managed to do enough damage and disruption here that they'd almost certainly removed this powerhouse from the world stage. This meant they'd win everywhere else. Major cities were decimated, obliterated, or simply mini-war zones between rival gangs and predators, feeding on scraps in the dark. As the urban centers had been devolving, the infrastructure had been targeted and carefully timed to go down entirely in a matter of hours, to ensure it left no room for intervention. The old man thought, at this point, the only things left to do were to save as many people as possible and deny these demon-serving individuals as many resources for their war efforts as possible. The old man shook his head at this thought, actual demons in force. He'd seen them individually and even several together from time to time, but never thought for a moment he'd actually live long enough to see this come to pass. Living nightmares and surviving with the will to fight true restants. Elias shook his head at the thought. Actual demons. He'd seen them individually, but never in force like this. They had appeared en masse, howling insanity and leaving carnage. Some called it an invasion, others vengeance. The MSM called it mass hallucination until they went dark. They were alien and demonic in every sense. The question was what to do next without falling prey to their influence. It was obvious some humans were working for them. Sarah sought a voice, low rasp, growing resolute. We don't need to guess anymore, do we, Elias? The game's not just about surviving. It's about denying them their prize. Our next move needs to be finding survivors and the wounded. Elias, voice, ancient with steel in his tone, and finding a new home. A place deep enough that bombardment and chemical attacks cannot reach us, with narrow entrances that even one or two could defend against thousands. Chloe, voice small but with a hint of growing strength. A cave system for an army and families? And to plant the seeds? Dave and voice, gruff, resolute warrior's tone. Sounds like the perfect den, hidden and defendable. They're used to picking off the weak. We're a pack now, Sarah, voice strong, passionate. The prize isn't this world entirely. It's the soul of it. They want us to lose our humanity. The fight is with faith, hope. Elias, voice, pride in his ancient tone. And what does that look like, Sarah? Sarah, voice calm, confident. It looks like this. It looks like us together. It looks like rebuilding. One brick, one prayer, one act of kindness at a time. It's a different kind of war. We don't just deny them resources. We deny them what they want most, our despair. And you, old man, you have things they want. Things that could turn the tide. The journey begins. The journey began at dawn. Elias led the way, his instincts guiding them toward ancient paths. Dave, his skills now invaluable, scouted ahead, his every movement a silent promise of protection. Sarah and Marcus tended to the wounded they found, makeshift bandages and medicine offered with desperate hope. Chloe, though scared, helped where she could, her quiet resilience growing with every mile. They moved mostly by night, hiding from the demons' patrols that scoured the ruined landscape. They found their first real survivor, a young boy named Leo shivering in an overturned car. Marcus tended his broken arm and Chloe wrapped him in her blanket, her hollow numbness giving way to purpose. Days bled into a weary rhythm of travel and hiding. They navigated rubble-strewn highways and overgrown trails, constantly vigilant. One night they heard the telltale howl of a demon nearby. Dave quickly led them into the cover of a dense copse of trees. He drew a long, curved knife, his eyes scanning the darkness, a primal protector. The howl grew closer, a grotesque sound that chilled them. Elias, with a subtle movement no one else noticed, opened his pouch. The shimmering dust glowed slightly, the air around them feeling warmer, safer. The howl passed, seemingly unaware of their presence. The group huddled together, their silent fear matched by their growing resolve. Elias would later explain that the seeds didn't just mend, they also hid. They masked their very human essence from the demon's senses. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elias pointed to a jagged crack in a sheer cliff face. There, he whispered, the entrance. The cave was barely visible, a narrow fissure hidden by dense foliage. Dave moved first, clearing the path with practiced ease. One by one they entered, the crack opening into a winding tunnel. Elias's glowing dust provided their only light, illuminating ancient, untouched rock. As they moved deeper, the air grew colder and stiller, the sounds of the dying world fading behind them. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast cavern. The ceiling was a dome higher than a cathedral. A subterranean river flowed through the center, its low gurgle a comforting sound. Waterfalls trickled down the walls and the air was clean and fresh. Elias pointed to the largest, flattest patch of soil near the river. Here, he said, the first seeds. Hope, as radiant as the shimmering dust, blossomed in their weary hearts. The journey was over, but the war had only just truly begun. Part 4. The seeds grew and blossomed immediately, their foliage unfurling with a soft, pulsing light and emanating a gentle warmth. The cavern, moments before a chilly tomb, was transformed into an ethereal garden. A soft, steady glow reflected off the water, and the air filled with the scent of otherworldly life. To the astonished questions from the group, Elias said little, his gaze fixed on the glowing plants. He simply whispered, "So it begins anew." He then turned to face them, his voice gaining a commanding tone that surprised them all. "These blossomed seeds will keep the devils away without them knowing why. The only real threat are people, good or bad. No one leaves this place until we know for certain they're not with the enemy. Marcus will bring you more patience. Understand that anyone attempting to leave is probably like the bacteria you fight to save your patients from. Kill it as quickly as you can or it'll kill everyone here. Do no harm cannot be applied to this situation as they're not really our people anymore. They're a part of the infection. Contain and restrain them if you can, but kill them if you must. It's non-negotiable, unfortunately. This goes for everyone." Elias paused, his hard gaze sweeping over the group. The quiet fear had been replaced by a grim resolve. "Sarah, Dave," he continued, "now we hunt. We move in silence, kill when we must. They die just like us, only louder if we're not careful. We hunt for survivors, useful supplies, and of course anything that kills them quickly. Part 5. Their new purpose was clear, if chilling. Dave, the unstoppable warrior, seemed more at ease than ever. This was a familiar world to him, stripped of pretense and reduced to raw survival. He and Sarah, a former tactician herself, formed an effective team under Elias's ancient guidance. Their first hunt was a reconnaissance mission to a nearby ruined town. They moved with a stealth born of necessity, ghosts among the rubble. Dave, with his primal hunting instincts, found useful weapons and medical supplies in an abandoned pharmacy. Sarah, with her keen eye for strategy, identified old military caches that might still hold valuable gear. They found several survivors too, scared, starving people huddled in cellars and under freeway overpasses. They didn't appear infected, but Elias's new harsh mandate weighed heavily on their consciences. They brought them back to the cave, but under heavy guard. Elias greeted them with a stoic and unwavering face, ordering them confined to a section of the cavern away from the central garden until they could be vetted. Marcus, now faced with the moral conundrum of his new orders, started tending to the wounded, but with a new watchful suspicion in his eyes. The true test came with a family, a mother and 2 young children. The children were clearly innocent, but the mother was cagey, secretive, and evasive under questioning. When she was alone, a small glimmer of light caught Sarah's eye. She saw the glint of a tiny, polished stone hidden in the mother's hand. It pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy, a marker for the demons. The woman was not a survivor, but a beacon, a Judas goat. The new law was swift and brutal. The mother was dealt with quietly and efficiently. The children, however, were brought back to the illuminated heart of the cavern, where they were placed under Chloe's care. Chloe, looking at their frightened faces, felt the weight of the moral cost. The cavern was a sanctuary, but at what price? Part 6, the cycle continued. They hunted, they found, they vetted. The cave population slowly swelled, not with an army, but with a community forged in a crucible of fear and hope. The glowing seeds thrived, their pulsating light a constant reminder of the precious life they were protecting and the dark forces they were fighting. Elias, their silent and watchful patriarch, was a contradiction, a peaceful scholar who was now an unyielding warlord. His words echoed in their minds, a constant chilling litany. Kill it as quickly as you can, or kill everyone here. The next hunt was a more deliberate foray into the heart of the nearest ruined city. Elias, Dave, and Sarah ventured out under a cloudless moon. The city was a wasteland of shattered concrete and twisted metal. But this time they weren't just looking for supplies. They were hunting a specific target, a human collaborator known for his tactical mind and deep connections to the demon forces. They moved through the labyrinthine streets, their training a silent, deadly language. They found him in a fortified building surrounded by human mercenaries and a few lesser demons. The fight was swift and brutal. Dave, a whirlwind of calculated violence, took on the mercenaries. Sarah, using her tactical mind, took out the demons with a surprising efficiency, using specially crafted projectiles derived from Elias's glowing dust. Elias himself confronted the Collaborator, not with a weapon, but with his ancient, almost mystical knowledge. He didn't kill him, but stripped him of his power, draining his malicious energy and leaving him a hollow husk. Elias held a handful of the glowing dust and let it fall to the ground, surrounding the man in a circle of pure, radiant energy that would repel the demons and condemn the Collaborator to an eternal, ironic prison. They returned to the cavern under a gray dawn, weary but victorious. The community welcomed them back, the silent understanding of their sacrifice weighing heavily in the air. The war was no longer just about survival. It was a crusade, a brutal and necessary struggle for the soul of their world. The new garden thrived, a symbol of hope and rebirth, but the cavern remained a fortress, a prison for a fragile peace bought with blood. Part 7. Marcus, the former doctor, moved through the makeshift infirmary in a daze, his hands performing the familiar, practiced motions of his craft. He cleaned and bandaged the injuries of the latest survivors, his face a mask of professional calm, but inside, a civil war raged. Elias's command, "Kill it as quickly as you can or it'll kill everyone here," was a constant chilling litany in his mind. It flew in the face of everything he had ever believed, everything his profession stood for. The Hippocratic Oath, a sacred and inviolable covenant he had taken in a world of order, was now a dead letter. He would glance over at the innocent, trusting face of Liam, the boy assisting him, and his heart would tighten with a cold dread. Liam saw only the science, the noble goal of healing, but Marcus saw the dark abyss that Elias had demanded they all stare into. What would Liam think if he saw Marcus, with a whispered word from Elias, refuse care to someone deemed a risk? The thought sickened him. He had chosen to heal, to save, not to judge and condemn. But in this new world, judgment was a matter of survival, and condemnation was a necessary evil. He spent his nights staring at the glowing foliage, the symbol of their fragile new life, questioning if the price was too high. He found himself studying his patients with a new, watchful suspicion, his diagnostic eye now seeking not just ailments but betrayal. Part 8. The psychological burden was immense. He found himself rationalizing Elias's orders, seeking a twisted form of medical justification. A contagion, he told himself, was not limited to bacteria or viruses. Betrayal was a kind of infection, one that could spread and doom them all. He began a small, secret journal, not for medical notes but for philosophical ones, a desperate attempt to reconcile his past life with his present reality. He wrote about the gray areas, the compromises, and the slow, insidious erosion of his soul. He noted how the line between healer and executioner had blurred, how he had become both at once. The Hippocratic Oath, once a beacon of unassailable morality, had been reframed as a naive luxury, a relic of a time when the world was not on the brink of absolute ruin. His gaze would drift to the two children, Liam and Alara. They were his hope, a stark and pure reminder of what they were fighting for. But they were also a constant source of his moral torment. He watched Liam help him, his small hand so gentle, and he knew that he was raising the boy in a world where do no harm was a conditional statement. He watched Alara, a girl of 8, learn to be a sentry, her senses honed not to the beauty of the world but to the coming darkness. Elias's philosophy had infected them all, and Marcus, the healer, was the most compromised of all. Part 9. Revision. One day they brought in a young woman, badly wounded. She was weak, disoriented, and covered in filth. Marcus and Liam immediately began to tend to her, but Elias and Sarah watched from a distance with cold, impassive eyes. Under Marcus's gentle questioning, the woman confessed to having worked with the enemy not out of malice but out of fear and desperation. She had provided them with information in exchange for protection. She was not a beacon, but she had knowingly aided their enemy. Marcus felt a wave of nausea, his internal conflict boiling over. He looked at Elias, who gave a silent, hard nod. The woman was not a survivor. She was an infection. Marcus's hands trembled. The decision was not his, but the act of withholding care, of condemning a woman to die, was his. He felt Liam's hopeful gaze on him, and the boy's innocent trust was a crushing weight. He looked back at Elias and offered a slow, deliberate nod. Elias, the ancient warrior, understood. Marcus, the healer, had died, and a new kind of guardian had been born in his place. He turned back to the woman, his face now a cold mask. He walked away from her, leaving her to her fate. Liam followed Marcus out, confusion and questions clouding his young eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you help her?" Marcus knelt, his face a grim study in resignation. "She was helping the devils, Liam," he whispered back, his voice low and heavy. "Like your stepmother had." Liam understood. He looked out at the new, growing community of refugees, his young gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had given him and Alara a safe harbor, food, and purpose. His young resolve steeled, leaving no pity for the woman behind them. He felt only the fierce, protective love for this new, extended family, this fragile new life that was worth any cost. The flicker of innocence in his eyes was replaced by a hardened, pragmatic light. The war had claimed another soul, and this time, it was a child's. Part 10. The incident with the Collaborator and the children marked a turning point. Elias's philosophy had not only been accepted but internalized. The community, once a collection of traumatized individuals, had coalesced into a unified, if brutal, family. The healing in Marcus's infirmary now came with a heavy, unstated cost. Hope and suspicion were two sides of the same coin, and survival demanded that they be constantly vigilant of both. Liam, now a hardened veteran of the infirmary, was a testament to this new reality. He no longer saw just people. He saw potential threats, and his innocent hands, so quick to offer a bandage, were just as ready to pull back. He had become Marcus's conscience, a stark, silent reflection of the man's moral compromises. Dave and Sarah's hunts became more and more successful. With their new mandate and the knowledge of Elias's secret tools, they were ruthless and efficient. They found more supplies, more survivors, and more collaborators. Each time the process was the same: vet, contain, and if necessary, eliminate. The cavern, with its glowing garden and bustling community, was a shining beacon of life in a world of darkness. But it was a light born of brutal choices and buried secrets. The demons, repelled by the seed's light, grew more desperate, and their attacks became more frenzied and unorganized, but also more frequent. The community, safe behind their narrow entrance and under the watchful eye of Dave and Alara, slowly began to rebuild. The children learned to read and write from Marcus, who had salvaged books from a ruined library. The adults, their hope renewed, began to construct more permanent shelters within the cavern. The glowing seeds, the source of their salvation, were both a blessing and a curse. They provided everything they needed and growth for a new world and a new life without the demons. But they were also the reason for the constant threat, the reason they had to be so ruthless. Far too many innocent lives depended on the success of this paradoxical effort. The war had not just changed the world, it had changed them, forcing them to become something colder than they'd ever considered, and yet more humanly loving towards their fellow residents here than they'd ever thought possible, all for the sake of the survival of the entire human species. As the months passed, a profound shift occurred within the cavern. The community, once a fractured collection of traumatized individuals, came to see Elias not as a cold and ruthless warlord, but as a deeply loving and burdened man. They came to understand that his strict vigil was born of a singular purpose: their survival. The heavy toll of each collaborator's fate visibly weighed on his conscience, a quiet sorrow in his ancient eyes. The initial handful of seeds had grown and spread, their luminous flora now covering the entire cave system. Their protective shielding had expanded, seeping through the porous rock and beginning to bring new, vibrant life to the otherwise dead terrain outside the narrow entrance. Simultaneously, a single magnificent tree had sprouted and grown with impossible speed from the riverbank, its height reaching the cavern's cathedral-like ceiling. Its roots spread like a living bridge across the subterranean river, its limbs filled with leaves that radiated a light different from the other plants, warmer, more vibrant. It also produced seed pods that, even at a glance, everyone knew were something truly special. Liam, now a hardened but still gentle 10-year-old, plucked one of the pods and ran to Elias, who had been sleeping, exhausted, for the first time in what felt like an age. Elias, startled awake, rubbed his eyes and accepted the seed with a soft, whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." Part 12. Elias, with the pod in his hand, gathered the community. He spoke with a quiet wonder that replaced his usual commanding tone. "These seeds mark a change of magnificent proportions," he explained, his ancient eyes alight with a mixture of awe and relief. "We each, including myself," he added with a rare, gentle smirk, "will consume one of these tiny seeds." He went on to explain their new properties. They would heal their bodies and, more importantly, purge any of the demons' corrupting power from anyone who consumed them. A wave of hopeful murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. "We must remain vigilant, make no mistake," he cautioned, the old warrior's instincts still keen. "But these seeds can be carried out and given as we find others in need. They offer a second chance, a path back from the brink of infection." The news was transformative. The brutal necessity of their survival, which had gnawed at Marcus's conscience and hardened Liam's heart, was suddenly lifted. There was a new way, a kinder way, to wage their war. The hunt for survivors would no longer be a test of their morality, but an act of salvation. The seeds of destiny had sprouted, and with them a new era for their desperate cause. Part 13. The change rippled through the cavern. Marcus, his face now free of its burdened mask, began preparing for a different kind of mission. He and Liam meticulously packaged the new seeds, their work a symbol of renewed hope. Liam's innocent hands, once steeled by the horror of betrayal, now worked with a radiant purpose focused on bringing healing instead of judgment. Alara, watching them, felt the cold fear that had haunted her dissipate. Her vigilance was no longer born of fear, but of protection for the light that had come into their world. Elias, Sarah, and Dave planned their next expedition. This time, their objective wasn't just to hunt for supplies and survivors, but to deliver salvation. They would seek out the infected, the traumatized, and the desperate, offering them the seeds and a new chance at life. The first mission was to the ruined city, where they knew collaborators still lingered. The risk was still great, the demons were relentless. But now they had a weapon more powerful than any blade or bullet, a seed of destiny, a hope for redemption in a world steeped in corruption. The war was far from over, but for the first time victory felt possible, and their humanity, long buried under layers of brutal survival, was finally beginning to re-emerge. The discovery of the tree and the seeds of destiny had injected a new, vibrant energy into the cavern community. Hope, once a fleeting and precious commodity, was now a tangible resource. Elias had overseen the distribution of the seeds, and as each person consumed the tiny luminescent pod, a visible change took place. Wounds healed, sickness vanished, and a newfound vitality replaced the gaunt weariness in their faces. With their physical health restored and their spirits renewed, a new phase of the war began. Dave and Sarah wasted no time. They began selecting and training squads of 5, their focus on creating mobile units that could venture out into the ruined world to find and save survivors. Their first team consisted of a hardened group of military veterans and a former U.S. Air Force pararescue medic. The veterans were a trio: Marcus Grinder Thorne, a stoic and battle-worn Army Ranger; Lena Petrova, a former Marine sharpshooter with a quiet, lethal efficiency; and Ben Carter, a Special Forces operative whose calm demeanor hid a tactical mind as sharp as any blade. The fourth member was Jessica "Jess" Ramirez, the former pararescue medic, whose calm under pressure and vast medical knowledge would be invaluable. Their first mission was a reconnaissance and rescue operation into a nearby industrial district, a place known to be infested with both demon forces and their human collaborators. The area was a labyrinth of twisted metal, shattered concrete, and dark, echoing warehouses. As they moved through the silent, oppressive landscape, Jess, connected to the cavern via a radio, felt a strange, unnerving buzz in her ears. "Incoming," she whispered into her comms. "Something's not right." Part 15. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a cacophony of guttural snarls and human screams. A pack of lesser demons, their eyes glowing with malevolent fire, poured from a ruined warehouse, their grotesque forms twitching with an unnatural hunger. They were not alone. A group of human collaborators armed with salvaged weapons moved alongside them, their faces twisted with a fanatical zeal. A firefight erupted, the crack of gunfire echoing through the ruined district. Grinder, Lena, and Ben immediately formed a defensive perimeter, their training taking over. Jess, meanwhile, tended to the wounded, using her medical skills to keep her squad mates in the fight. The battle was a brutal, chaotic symphony. Lena's shots found their marks with chilling accuracy, taking down both demons and humans with equal precision. Ben, a master of close-quarters combat, moved through the chaos like a ghost, his blade a flash of silver in the low light. Grinder, a rock of stability, held the line, his steady fire keeping the bulk of the enemy at bay. But the demons were relentless, their resilience and sheer brutality overwhelming. One of them managed to get through the perimeter, its claws slashing at Jess. She parried the blow with her forearm, her combat training kicking in, but the demon was too strong. It lifted her high, its fangs bared, ready to end her life. Part 16. In that moment, Jess did something instinctual. She plunged her hand into her pack, grabbing a handful of the new seeds of destiny. She thrust them into the demon's face, the luminescent motes shimmering against its corrupted flesh. The demon howled, not in pain but in agony, as the seed's pure energy burned it from the inside out. It dropped Jess and convulsed, its body slowly turning into a pillar of shimmering, radiant light before dissolving into dust. The other demons, sensing the potent threat of the seeds, recoiled, their initial bloodlust replaced by a primal fear. The human collaborators, seeing their demonic allies falter, broke rank and fled. The firefight ended as quickly as it had begun, the only sounds now the heavy breathing of the squad and the distant echoes of their struggle. The veterans, battle-hardened and cynical, stared at the spot where the demon had stood, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Jess, her arm bleeding but her spirit intact, looked at her hand, the residue of the seeds still glowing. The seeds were not just for healing. They were a weapon, a powerful tool against the demonic forces. They had not only survived their first real battle, but had also discovered a new, more potent use for the seeds of destiny. They had learned a vital lesson. Their war would not be fought with conventional weapons alone, but with the very essence of creation itself. The seeds of destiny were not just for healing the infected, they were for eradicating the infection itself. They returned to the cavern, their mission a success, their knowledge of the seed's true power forever changed. The war had just gotten a lot more interesting. Part 17. The seeds of destiny were not just a panacea, they were a holy fire. Elias had warned them of their potent cleansing ability, but Jess was the first to witness the devastating truth. As the squad returned to the cavern, word of the demon's fate spread like wildfire. Elias confirmed their grim discovery. To those simply under the demonic influence, the seeds were painful, a searing but ultimately healing fire that burned away the corruption. But to those who had fully and willingly committed themselves to the enemies, the seeds were a swift and lethal judgment, a cleansing fire that consumed them entirely. This new reality landed like a hammer blow, casting a dark shadow over the hopeful mood. Marcus, his face a mixture of grim resolve and profound dread, listened to Jess's report. The seeds were not just a tool for redemption, but a test, a line drawn in the sand. He who had struggled so much with Elias's kill or be killed philosophy was now faced with a tool that made the decision for them. There would be no more gray areas, no more compromises, only a binary outcome, healing or death. He looked at Liam, whose quiet gaze seemed to pierce through his moral conflicts, and felt a profound sadness. This new truth was a heavy burden, one he wasn't sure he could carry. Part 18. The next squad, led by Lena Petrova and accompanied by Liam, a choice made by Elias to further the boys' training, ventured out. Their mission was to a refugee camp, a place suspected of being infiltrated by collaborators. Liam, though young, moved with a seasoned veteran's stealth, his small size and keen senses a boon to the squad. He helped Jess, who was still recovering from her injuries, package the seeds. He listened intently as Jess explained how the seeds' purifying properties worked, a grim but vital lesson. They arrived at the camp under the cover of night, a silent force moving through the chaos and despair. Lena, with her sharpshooter's precision, identified the most suspicious individuals, singling them out for a closer look. They approached a small group huddled around a fire, their faces gaunt and their eyes filled with a desperate weariness. As they offered them the seeds, one of the men recoiled, a flicker of fear and hatred in his eyes. He shrieked, not in pain but in rage, a demonic influence bubbling to the surface. He lunged at Liam, his hands reaching for the boy's throat. Part 19. Liam, surprisingly, didn't flinch. He had seen too much horror to be easily cowed. He held up a handful of the glowing seeds, a silent challenge. The man recoiled, his face contorting in agony as the seed's light seared his corrupted skin. The other collaborators, witnessing the spectacle, panicked. Some fled, others cowered, their demonic allegiance exposed. The uninfected refugees, seeing their oppressors revealed, stood in stunned silence. The seeds did their work swiftly. Some of the collaborators writhed in pain, the seeds burning away the demonic influence within them. Their screams were a symphony of torment and release, the purging fire a necessary evil. But one of them, a fanatic whose commitment was absolute, screamed in fury and pain as the seeds began their lethal work. He dissolved into a pillar of shimmering, radiant light, his essence consumed by the pure energy of the seeds. The refugees, once victims, now watched their salvation and their retribution unfold before them. Liam, his small face streaked with dirt and blood, looked at the dissolving man with a grim, unwavering gaze. The seeds, once a symbol of hope and healing, were now also a symbol of brutal justice. He understood now. The price of their new life was not just vigilance, but an unwavering resolve to confront the darkness, no matter the cost. They returned to the cavern, their mission a success, their understanding of the seed's true nature forever etched in their souls. The seeds of destiny had come to fruition, and their true purpose, both healing and lethal, was now terrifyingly clear. Part 20. Word was spreading through the area, carried on the whispers of survivors and the fear of demons, about the seeds of destiny and the rescuers who wielded them. The news, a mix of awe and terror, preceded Liam's squad. Liam, now a seasoned veteran of the cavern's brutal morality, felt a strange, quiet peace. He had come to terms with the seed's dual nature, finding solace in the fact that no one was forced to consume them. The choice was always theirs, even if the outcome was terrifying to witness. He knew the seeds were not a weapon of cruelty, but of stark, unyielding truth. One such group, the staff and children of an orphanage, saw the squad approaching and, having heard the rumors, immediately welcomed them. The adults and oldest children had been fighting off attacks for months, staying on the move. But despite their best efforts, the youngest children were disappearing, one by one, into the night. The apparent leader, a weary but determined man named Samuel, and his most dependable people had long suspected one of their own, but lacked proof. The suspect, a man named Corvus, had always refused to take the seeds, offering weak excuses. Now, surrounded by their saviors, his refusal was a glaring indictment. Part 21. Before anyone could protest, Samuel and his most trusted people moved swiftly. They grabbed the struggling Corvus, who began to howl, a muffled pain sound. They forced the seed of destiny he'd been given into his mouth and held it shut until he, thrashing and desperate, finally swallowed it. The seed immediately began its work, and Corvus's howls turned into shrieks of demonic pain and fury. The corruption, long festering beneath the surface, was now on full, terrifying display. Corvus's body writhed, his face contorting into a mask of pure evil, his screams echoing through the silent, watchful group. He dissolved, not with a cleansing fire, but with a guttural, malevolent scream, his essence consumed by the seed's pure energy. The younger children, who had been huddled together in fear, looked at the dissolving man with wide, terrified eyes. But the older ones, who had seen too much horror, simply stared, their young resolve steeled. Samuel, his face grim but resolute, stepped forward and introduced himself and his people. He thanked the squad for their intervention and their salvation. He then looked at Liam, his eyes holding a shared understanding, and requested another seed to replace the one he'd used on their hidden traitor. He understood the brutal cost of their salvation, and he was willing to pay it. Part 22. The squad, having witnessed the grim spectacle, gave Samuel another seed. They then proceeded to administer the seeds to the rest of the orphanage staff and children. The process was a mix of awe and trepidation. Some, relieved and hopeful, took the seeds willingly. Others, especially the younger children, needed reassurance and gentle coaxing. But as the seeds did their work, healing the weary bodies and cleansing the fear from their hearts, the atmosphere shifted. Hope, a fragile thing, bloomed in the ruined world. Liam, who had watched the entire process with a grim, unwavering gaze, felt a familiar cold weight settle in his gut. The seeds were not a magic cure-all. They were a tool of survival, a testament to the brutal choices that had to be made. But as he saw the children, their faces now bright with a newfound hope, he felt a flicker of warmth in his heart. The cost was high, but the reward was a new life, a new chance for these innocent souls. He knew that the war was far from over, but with the seeds of destiny, they had a weapon and a hope that could turn the tide. The hunt continued, and with each rescued soul, the fragile light of their new world grew a little brighter.